Asia for the moment. Time to break down market action. Our stock watchers are in the house. Arnie in Singapore, Mike Fern in Tokyo. We'll kick off with Arnie. Hey.
Haslinda, thank you very much. Well, nothing mixed about what's going on in South Korea right now, with the Kospi back with a vengeance after 3 days of holidays, up 4% right now, boosted by a rebound in South Korean consumer confidence as well. Samsung Electronics is leading gains. This is the biggest in terms of market weight on the Kospi right now, helped by a U.S. International Trade Commission ruling that rival Sharp had infringed on 2 Samsung patents. An ITC judged that Sharp's LCDs should be barred from the U.S. market. The ruling is still subject to a full review by the ITC's 6 members. Investors are shrugging off a Macquarie report meantime, which says Samsung shares will test recent lows of around 410,000 won amid the poor fourth quarter results that came out Friday, and also the company's outlook. The brokerage is one of 2 with a sell on the stock, forecasting a 90% fall in operating profit this year. But most still see Samsung as a buy. As you can see, there are 26 buys, 7 holds, and 2 sells. Shares of both Samsung and Hynix are higher amid news of consolidation in the memory sector as well. The latest being Qimonda's bankruptcy filing. Take a look at Hynix, up by over 13%. And Samsung Electronics gaining nearly 7.5%. LG also up by 2.5% right now. Steelmakers POSCO, Hyundai and Dongkook are up amid speculation the worst may be over for metals producers. This after U.S. Steel and Nucor stayed profitable. U.S. Steel and Nucor are the 2 biggest American producers of the metal. And finally, take a look at these 2 companies, the mobile players, the first and second largest, KT Freetel and SK Telecom. KT Freetel this morning reporting its biggest profit increase in more than 3 years as competition eases in the sector. KT Freetel joins SK Telecom in reporting higher earnings for the latest quarter amid easing competition as they lock in more customers. Haslinda, I'll send it back to you.
All right, Arnie Gay, thanks so much for that. Another boyfriend in the house. Mike Fern, how are the stocks in Japan doing?
Well, the Nikkei is up 0.5%. The topics is unchanged at the moment. Banks are heading higher. The Yomiuri newspaper says the government will ask regional lenders to change their rules, allowing them to get government cash more quickly. Some regional banks cannot issue preferred shares. We've got the banking index up 2.4%. Now, interestingly enough, we did have brokerages falling, but now the securities index has turned positive. Nomura actually up by 1/5%. Japan's biggest brokerage may have to sell off unprofitable units after reporting a record $3.8 billion quarterly loss. It's not saying which parts of the business it will sell. It bought Lehman's assets in Asia and Europe last year. It says that it's going to cost $2 billion to integrate them. It had a $1.5 billion trading loss in the third quarter. The MSCI World Index falling 22%. Daiwa Securities down 1/5%. It's also suffering from falling trading volumes. The Nikkei newspaper saying Japan's second biggest brokerage may lose more than $560 million in the 9 months through September. It says trading volumes fell and Daiwa wrote down the value of its investments. Not great news for brokerages. Interestingly, Nomura has turned negative again, down 1/3%. And the topics now down by 0.1%. Haslinda, a very volatile session. Back to you.
All right, Mike, thanks so much for that. Now, the numbers are staggering. Figures from the United Nations suggest that in 2009, the number of undernourished people in the world will top 1 billion for the first time. Emerging countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and Vietnam will be home to 2/3 of them, about 3 times the population in Europe living on less than $2 a day. Organizations like the UN Millennium Campaign are seeking to change all that, aiming to eradicate poverty, illiteracy and diseases by 2015. Now let's speak to Salil Shetty, his director of the UN Millennium Campaign, the man with the almost impossible task of turning things around. Salil joins us from New York. Hey, good evening.
Good evening, Haslinda.
Salil, 2015, just 6 years away. Am I being too skeptical if I were to say that I don't think you'll succeed?
Well, as far as Asia Pacific is concerned, because that's really what the focus of this conversation is, we've actually seen quite important successes in the first period of the Millennium Development Goals. These goals were agreed, the Millennium Development Goals were agreed at the UN in September 2000, and we are now 9 years into this. And in these 9 years, in the last 15 years, if you take a slightly longer term view of things, the Asia-Pacific region has actually reduced poverty levels very significantly. About 400 million people have come out of poverty. And on many of the goals right now, about half the countries in the Asia-Pacific region are actually on track. So on the aggregate level, things are not looking too bad, but aggregates are misleading. And particularly in the Asia-Pacific region, if you look at the reality both within countries and between countries, you have a lot of variation. I myself have just come back now from Jakarta this weekend. I've been in Indonesia and Philippines over the last week. And you can see that while, say, a country like Indonesia on aggregate is doing well, there are many parts of Indonesia which are struggling to meet the goals. There's very high levels and growing levels of inequality, say, in a country like the Philippines. So I think that's a big challenge we are facing right now.
You say that 400 million are out of poverty, well, in the last 9 years, as far as you're concerned. But given the financial turmoil, given the recession that we're seeing right now, I think more people are going into poverty as well.
That is true. I mean, this is, we have to remember this financial crisis comes on top of a food crisis, fuel crisis, and, a long-term climate crisis. So that's all the more reason why governments have to redouble their efforts in the remaining 6-year period. We have to remember, Haslina, that a lot of the problems we are facing are very solvable in that sense. I mean, if you take something like child malnutrition, if you take water and sanitation, any of these issues, it's not like we don't know what needs to be done. And really, no government in the world today can say that they don't have resources to meet the needs of the poorest people. The world has found almost $5 trillion out of nowhere in the last couple of months to bail out some of the richest people in the richest banks. So, and particularly in Asia-Pacific region, these governments do have the resources. It boils down to having the political will to make sure that these resources are allocated for the achievement of the basic needs of the poorest people, and making sure also that once you allocate the resources actually reach the people, because there's a huge amount of corruption and mismanagement as well, which we need to keep into account.
Lots of super rich nations, like you mentioned, maybe not the case now with financial crisis, but even before that, why couldn't the haves help pull out the poor out of their plight? What is the stumbling block there?
Well, I think, many of the countries in the Asia-Pacific region have seen a significant amount of economic growth over the last decade, but a lot of the growth doesn't reach the poorest people. And so this comes into the question really is the kind of economic growth we are seeing is not inclusive. It's not focused on the growth in the sectors in which poor people work. So I would say that, one of the big obstacles is the kind of economic growth models that we pursued. But the second is all of these governments in the region have committed themselves to creating national plans which are focused on the needs of poor people, on achieving the Millennium Development Goals. But many of them have not done that. And the resources they allocate, there's a very direct correlation between how much resources you allocate. Say, for example, Thailand allocates 8% of its gross national income for education. And you can see the results. Countries like Philippines allocate almost half of that. And as a result, there's big gaps in educational achievement. So you allocate the resources, you get the benefits. But most importantly, at the local level, if the poor don't have access to the resources because of just corruption and mismanagement, we're never going to get to these goals. Women, groups are socially excluded.
Salil?
These are the people we need to focus on.
Salil, we have to leave it there. Salil Shetty, thank you so much for your insights today. Bloomberg Live, back in 2.